All right, I hit record and I'm with Carol Painter in New Zealand, which always sounds like just Rachel Herron moved to New Zealand, and ever since then, I never thought about New Zealand, but when Rachel moved there and I listened to her podcast and I'm one of her patrons, I listen to her newsletter, she describes it like she's living in a fantasy land, like this ideal world. So I'm very
As
jealous.
long as nobody else is here, you see, you can say what you like.
It's very
Mm,
funny. All
mm,
right, so Carol, tell us a little bit. You've been on the podcast before, but for those
mm.
that didn't hear that episode, tell us a little bit about where you are in your writing journey.
Okay, so for me, writing is a retirement passion. I'm not looking to build a huge brand or career that goes on for 50 years because that would be silly. Um, and really all about learning the craft, learning the process. I've been working on a novel called Flight, has been right from day one. But who knows? For about 7 years, thoroughly enjoying it, learning heaps as I go. And I dabble in short form occasionally with short stories and flash fiction.
Nice. All right. So where is Flight in the process? Because we're talking about the characters from Flight today, right?
Really.
Where is Flight in the process of being written right now? What number draft are you on? Where are you at with it?
It's probably about draft 4,
Okay.
which is turning out to be a rewrite, Jeff.
Well, why'd you put my name in there?
Because I think you first kind of said, "You're doing a rewrite, right?" And I said, "I guess I am." And you're right. There's much, this is the first draft for me that feels like it's come alive.
Great. That's so good.
So I think it must mean I'm going in the right direction.
That's a great place to be. Um,
Mm,
yeah, life is too short to write books we don't enjoy,
mm,
right? Like if you're writing a book that you don't enjoy,
mm,
there's not enough time in life to do that. Writing books
agree.
is hard. You got to write ones that make you feel like they're coming alive. All right, well that's awesome. Okay, so you sent me this beautiful character chart. I'm going to share it. And I love it.
Guys, for the spelling mistakes, there are a few.
Oh, I'd never catch them. I wouldn't know they're there.
Mm,
So I would call this a character Bible,
mhm.
which
Yep.
is really great. You've got the character names on the top, and then you've got all of their ages, which is so important because I always forget how old my stupid characters are. You've got their role, which is great, and I like you've got your protagonist, and then how they relate to your protagonist, which is interesting, and I like that. Or you're kind of because you have two, you have a mother and daughter.
Sure.
You got their key role in the story, which is great, and you've got Clarissa as our vehicle. You've got their key background info, where they live, their nationality, their ethnicity, their Enneagram type, which I love. Did you do that before you and I talked, or was that a post you and I talking?
Um,
I can't remember who I've obsessed over the Enneagram with and who I haven't.
I picked it up from your interview with Claire Taylor
Ah,
and
okay.
have subsequently read all her stuff on it.
Yeah, it's
And
great, isn't it?
I can't say that I'm, deeply familiar with it, but a bit more than I was.
Nice. I love
Mm.
it. Okay. And then you've got occupation, relationship status, values, personality. If we
Mm.
were going to talk about this as like the dialogue Daisy, you've got the roots going
Mm.
all the way down to number 12.
Mhm.
And then you've got the stem, and then I would put the flower down here, the
Good.
actual like
Yeah. Yeah.
character voice. Okay, so this is how long did this take you?
Um, a couple of hours.
Okay. Do you do it as you write, or is this something you sat down and did at one sitting?
No. I had skeleton of it, and maybe I had 2 or 3 different documents to be fair with different aspects, and
Yeah.
then I added that out.
Nice. How do you use it now? I'm just curious. Is it just a
Um,
place where you store things, or are you actively using it as you write?
no, I mean, well, only in terms of the demographics and stuff like that. Funny thing was, I realized I'd done all this, and I don't think it matters too much. There's absolutely no physical characteristics and the usual
I I
Yeah,
was going to ask about that next. Yeah.
I've got them though. I've got them,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think these things are more important personally than those other things. That's
I
how I,
100% do too.
except
Yeah.
when you keep contradicting yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think the hard thing about characteristics is you got to get them out early. Um, have I told you about my foible, my failure with characteristics in my first
No.
book
Mm,
that I wrote? In my mind, the lead character was a almost 7 foot tall African American man who rode a motorcycle and was a newspaper reporter.
right.
And I had this image in my head, but I don't. For the first draft of the novel, I didn't physically describe him until
Mm,
chapter 23.
mm,
And I wrote the book, I edited the book, and then I gave it to a bunch of beta readers because I'd never done a book before. And I did the whole, like, I printed it off. I printed off like 15 copies of it. I had them like bound and like delivered it to these people I
right.
know. There's like, please leave notes in it. And I remember several of them were so angry because they had pictured,
Uh,
because of his role in society and how people talk to him, they thought my lead character was a like 20-pound, 20-year-old scrawny kid on a bicycle. And
my
so when
goodness.
I finally describe him, they're like, "What are you talking about?" So yeah, you got to get to that. Was how I learned the hard way. You got to get your character descriptions out early. If you're going to describe a character,
Mm,
describe them early, so you're not fighting with the reader's imagination later
yes.
in the book. Yeah. Okay, so you got this beautiful Bible. How can I help you tonight? What are we working on?
Oh, okay. I'm hoping you're going to challenge me a lot and
Okay.
ask me key things. I've got a couple of notes. I thought you might say, is there anything in particular about the characters? And I've got a couple of things that are not, they're not central. So, except to say that I've wrestled with the vehicle, etc. terminology, the
Okay.
dialogue, and I don't find it very useful and I don't fully get it.
Okay.
Um, so I have actually got a page with who I think the different main characters are, but I don't find it, I'm not finding it a tool that is helping me much.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, so I'm not using that very much. I drop vehicle in there, but then, the antagonistic forces in the traditional language and stuff are spread over a whole lot of characters.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I thought, well, I'm not going to get hung up on that, but I'll table that for starters. I don't really, unless you think it would be useful to really delve into that, I don't necessarily feel I need to. I'm happy to work with other things. So,
No, I mean, that tool. So no tool works for every writer, right?
mm,
Like you got to find the tools that work for you and use those
mm,
tools. Um,
mm,
and that tool is specifically about understanding how a character grows. So
I,
if you want to talk about character growth, we can talk about that tool, but if you don't want to talk about how Clarissa changes over the course of the novel, then I don't think we need to talk about that tool.
I've sort of got a note of their arcs, and I'm fairly clear in my mind on how she changes.
Okay.
Um, I have several there who don't change.
That's perfectly
Um,
fine. She's your vehicle. She's the one that has to
yeah.
change.
Okay. Okay. So
Everybody
that,
else is just gravy, right? Like
yeah.
if you've got your mashed potatoes, or since it's Thanksgiving here in the States, if you've got your turkey and dressing, those are the main things. And then that's your vehicle character arc. All other character arcs showing change in those characters is gravy. It's just like the bonus that you pour on top of the real stuff.
I thought you might be sick of turkey by now.
No, we just started. I My family cooked it. My wife and I, so you're gonna get a story now. She has 3 brothers and they all have wives and kids. And then my mom and my sister all live in town. We all live within like 20 minutes of each other. And
Amazing.
my sister has she lives with my mom and she has Downs.
Mm,
And so we all get together, and sometimes other in-laws come as well for every holiday. Every holiday, those are like the staple people there. And it just depends on whose house we're at, right? Like all the guests are the same. We just move, just move houses. So yeah, but every Thanksgiving, my wife and I, for the last like 4 or 5 years, have made the turkey for this crew of over 30 people. And this year we got our friend has been raising turkeys in his backyard.
It's useful.
It is. I was surprised when he told me. I was like, okay. And he's like, do you want to buy one for Thanksgiving? I was like, he's like, they're free range because they literally just run wild in his giant
Mm.
backyard. I was like, okay. So we bought this turkey and it was great. Like it was amazing. I was really impressed. There's 25 pounds of meat after we took it off the bone. And so it was a giant turkey. And I think we probably ate 10 pounds of it at Thanksgiving. And
Right.
so we're dividing the rest of it up, but I still have about 5 pounds of turkey meat that and post Thanksgiving you're just putting it in everything. I'm like, all right, dinner
Yeah.
tonight is turkey melts and tomorrow is turkey casserole. And so
Mm.
probably by about Thursday of this week I will be turkeyed out because we'll have
That's what
turkey for every meal.
we're like that at Christmas, right?
Yeah,
We've tended to do, but this year I think I'm going to flag it and do something different.
nice. We do ham at Christmas. That's our
We do ham
Christmas.
as well, but I'm so on ham. So,
Yeah. Okay, sorry, that was a big
no,
aside.
anyway, yeah.
Okay, so you don't want to talk about character growth. You got that
So,
down.
so the other thing that I had a note of to mention was I am finding quite challenging, even though there's drafts of it written in the last act.
Okay.
The roles, getting all the roles of the characters in appropriately and in a satisfying way in the climax and resolution part of the story, which must owe its roots to way, 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 way back. So having you know, yeah, I'm wrestling with that a bit. And I have to say that I'm not up to rewriting that last part yet. So it may all start to become clearer when I get there.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I know their roles really well, were right, at least for the first half of the whole thing.
So
Um,
when you say their roles and wrapping up their roles, do you mean kind of like the outside of your vehicle character, everyone else is like how you're wrapping up everybody's relationship with your vehicle character? Is that what you mean?
in bringing the story to a finality
Yeah.
and in resolution, I obviously the subplot thread, which we haven't talked about in the past, but the subplot thread has to satisfactorily, find its way in there,
Yeah.
which it does a little bit in a little bit of an abrupt way, I think, at the moment. Um, and I guess all the key characters, the main characters, should kind of feature there somewhere.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, if you're writing a pure like Save the Cat style,
mm,
right, where you're doing kind of what I would say is like our classic movie beat structure, then yeah, your Clarissa should experience a dark night of the soul
mhm,
where, well, first she should think she's won, and then like she should think that she's like conquered the day.
mm.
And her story is she's trying to live in a new country. She's running away from an abusive husband. Her mother shows up. Her and her mother's relationship is strained and difficult. Um, am I missing a component of her story?
No, that's where it
Okay.
starts off. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah. And then where is she ending?
Um, well, the things that come to challenge her are not of the making of Vanuatu, which
Mhm.
is where the novel is set. They come out of her family background
Yeah.
vis-a-vis her identity. So she faces a huge um, upsetting challenge to her identity delivered by her mother, which is in the
Interesting.
very early part of the story. And then she's working through that in various ways. And the subplot, which starts to build in sort of about just a third, maybe just before the end of the first section, is where this little boy Tumo arrives in her class partway through a term. And he is a bit of a mystery kid. He's been brought in by someone who's sort of an acquaintance. They can't work out what the family relationship is because it's all very murky. And she's kind of emotionally engages with this child, and there's some aspects of the way of his character that particularly makes sense in that regard in terms of her own background. Now she then gets pretty attached to him and protective of him. And so she's starting to resolve these things in her identity. Meanwhile, she's very protective of this child. So she comes up to a major crisis subsequently where she thinks she's just getting her own major challenge to her life resolved and lots of good things are happening, where suddenly something happens with this child. And because of her own background, she flicks into a behavior, which then means that she acts, and this would be the most proactive she's been by then in the whole story, because she's been starting to get more like that, more confident and more knowing herself. And she acts in a way that she thinks is the right thing to do, but in the process of doing, she infringes local cultural protocols.
Okay.
So then she faces a huge test as to how that is resolved. And there's a further complication with the child where he disappears. So, and then through that, she's getting to know a new family that is part of what's come out of her earlier stuff.
Okay, so let me summarize, and I'm going to summarize in like bits, like
Yep.
little lines,
Mm-hmm.
because let's solve the mystery of the child first.
Mm-hmm.
So, like because the first thing I'd start, and tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Mm.
The first thing I heard you say is that the part of the story you're getting ready to rewrite and that you can't quite ground in your mind is, how does the story of the child work into the story of Clarissa's larger arc?
No, I feel it works in with the arc okay. It's the execution of it.
Okay. The execution meaning it's not showing up enough in the story. Execution meaning it feels like it's its own side story and doesn't connect.
Well, I feel like it connects okay. It could possibly connect more. And I suppose I've got a question about how much of it to, what sort of proportion should that have. I don't tell it on its own. It's always got this, there's always stuff going on around her main story. It's not like
Yeah.
an add-on.
So
It's got the same thematic content.
yeah. So let's table that. I have a couple more questions to ask you before we get to how often it should occur.
Yeah.
So let's table it for the moment, that question. And Clarissa's, again, tell me if I'm right or wrong, correct me where I'm wrong. Clarissa's journey through the book, she is rejecting her past self.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother and Vanuatu force her to accept aspects of herself. At the
Yes.
end of the book, she becomes a whole person, past and present, united.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes. I almost never get that right, Carol. Okay, so what about the child?
Mm-hmm.
How is Clarissa's past self represented by this child?
She, in two ways. First of all, he presents as unloved, um, unkind of without unloved and very very vulnerable, uh, and increasingly she begins to suspect he's being abused.
Okay. So that's all her past self as well.
Yeah,
Her
she's
past
fled
self is,
the violent relationship herself. So
yeah.
suddenly something clicks about his behavior that she recognizes, and
Mhm.
she leaps to a conclusion, which may or may not be correct, that this child's in real danger.
Okay. Is he?
He is, but perhaps not to the degree she thinks. So at the moment, that's where there's certainly a threat presents, but she is quite, the way that she perceives it is quite, judgment goes out the window, let's say. So she's responding totally emotionally and protectively, and putting her own security, her own everything about her own self aside, because she feels absolutely like she must save this child.
Okay.
And that's how she's seeing it.
So there's an interesting thing here in Clarissa, and I promise I'm getting to the closing
Oh, this
question
is
we
fun.
had.
This is good.
There's a question I have about Clarissa. We've got I'm gonna pull up a whiteboard. You and I've used these before.
Mhm.
Um there's a question I have about Clarissa, and I feel like part of the reason you're vague on the climax is
Mhm.
because I'm hearing there's a vagueness in Clarissa that has to be so the child and how the child works in Clarissa's story.
Mhm.
sh- what you're describing is a classic kind of her projecting onto the child herself,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So we have this kid that is like, reminds, oh, let's not do green because green
Mhm.
tends to mean like, oh, it's done. We have this kid that, child triggers past fears for Clarissa. In that, like, what you're describing is that, her past abuse equals child's abuse, right? Is the assumption she's making. Um, yeah, so that's the assumption she's making at the beginning. And then you're describing that she like runs in to protect the child in a
Mhm.
sacrificial way.
Absolutely.
So at the same time, we have this plot running of past Clarissa who was unprotected from abuse. And
Not as
she,
a child though, just remember
no,
that.
yeah, as an
Yeah.
adult. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she escapes.
Mhm.
But I would argue, I would argue that she's not a child, but she sees that as her childhood,
Oh, fair enough. Yes.
right? Like, does that make like not actually as like, oh, I was a child when I was abused, but that is her emotional childhood in the book, right? Like that's her like, this is where she's grown. This is the Clarissa we know has grown out of this abuse.
Mhm.
Um, she's running away, kind of seeking safety. She escapes it to this new world, and then mom emerges and brings past with her.
Mm.
So there's a sense of danger and like a return to abuse. Not
Ah,
mom wasn't the abuser,
okay.
but there's a return to the past here that she's got going on. Is that right?
Not well, just correct me if I'm making the wrong If
It's your book, Carol. You're not going to make the wrong. You correct me if I'm making the wrong
it's my
mistake.
book.
It's your book.
No.
Don't listen to me.
Oh my God.
I know.
Um, the only thing I would say there is that, um, oh, I've distracted myself. The intervention of her mother at that point in the story brings with it a whole new set of issues. It's nothing to do with
Nothing to
this.
do with abuse. Okay.
It's to do with her identity, right?
Interesting.
Who she
Describe
is.
So describe her idea. So what you're saying is that she runs and she's seeking. So there's a step here that I'm missing, which is
Okay,
like,
let me won't what happens basically is that she thinks that her father who brought her up is her father, and she idolized him. He was killed in an accident when she was 9. She
okay,
still idolizes him, and in some ways she's living a life that she thinks he'd be proud of. So she's not developed her own, pathway in life. Her mother, in coming to Vanuatu, is coming to tell her, because of a set of circumstances that have forced her really, that in fact the father she thought was her father was not, but that she was fathered by a French guy that the mother met in Vanuatu years ago.
how did she think her father would feel about her past abuse?
Sorry, you broke up then. What was it?
What did Clarissa's dad think about past Clarissa in her mind?
Um,
She feels like she's come to this new place and she's like, oh, now I'm living a life that my dad would be proud of. Was she not living a life that her dad would be proud of before?
it's a teaching thing that she's doing because she thinks he'd be proud of her, and so she's come to Vanuatu to take up a teaching job because that's what she's trained in. She's quite ambivalent about teaching. She's saying, I want to be a terrific teacher, dad to be proud of me, subtext.
Okay.
But
Was she not teaching when she was abused?
yes, she was, but dad had been long since dead then.
Okay.
Her father died when she was 9.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you see the connection I'm trying to make here, though? Can you hear that? So we've got this past abuse.
Mm-hmm.
She escapes, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
telling me that, like, in her new identity, she's trying to make her father proud. So the
Absolutely.
question is, like, where does the desire to make her father proud come from?
Um, Partly because she has a strong memory of when he was still alive and they were on a holiday, like about a year before he was killed. They were watching some small children on a beach,
Okay.
and she was just immersed in that, and she said, I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up, and I'm going to be a terrific teacher, and so on. And that's one of the most memorable things from her last year with him. So she thinks she's internalized that as, I promised my father was going to be a terrific teacher.
Gotcha. So we've got this. That's the step I was missing.
Okay.
Happy childhood with dreams.
Mm.
Maybe not seen in the book, but it's
Mm.
definitely, we're not talking about the scenes of the book right now. We're talking about Clarissa's
No,
journey.
no, sure, sure. Yeah.
Happy childhood with dreams and dad.
Mm-hmm. I have got that dropped in
Oh, nice.
briefly. Yeah.
And then we get the next step on her journey. That's like the big milestone is she finds herself in an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So, part of like childhood for her, childhood dreams die in abusive relationship.
I suppose what's linked to that also is that when after her father dies and her mother relationship with her mother just goes steadily downhill, she never feels like her mother's there to protect her or does protect her.
Gotcha. Feels unprotected. Now we're getting to the kid. Feels unprotected by
Mhm.
her mother. Okay. So,
Her older brother, to some extent, looks after her. He's about 5 or 6 years older, but not in the way that a parent would.
yeah. And so and Carol, I just gotta say, the minute you introduce a kid in
Hmm.
danger, 9 times out of 10, this novel is now about parenting. The minute, like, about relationships with mothers and fathers, and relationships with, like, how we go. I'm not saying that, like, oh, is it good parenting or bad parenting. I'm saying that, like, all of a sudden the child becomes an image of everybody's, like,
Mm.
inner child or past childhood, or, like, the minute you put a kid into the book, it's like, oh, well, how do the other characters see themselves in this
Mm.
child, right? Like,
Well, I've got
that's
this great idea now from, thank you for that. I think I should put my cats in.
okay. Why your cats? Because they're your children? Is that
Pretty much.
nice? Well, it's not about the fact that they're a child, it's about the vulnerability of children.
Vulnerability, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's not. It has nothing to do with their age. It's about the fact that
I
children
know.
are naturally vulnerable. So you could use a cat, right? Like, you could use
Yes.
whatever. You just need to put something in that's vulnerable. The minute
Mm,
you throw something in that's vulnerable that the lead character is connected to, we
mm,
start the reader's going to naturally start asking, like, what is with this connection, what does this vulnerable thing represent to the character? Does that make sense?
yes.
Yeah.
And I've had a few as I write the interactions between them. I've had to make quite a few. I've moved around a bit in terms of how obvious I want that to be, or how spelled out, or how on the nose.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Pulling
And
back.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's just about personal style, right?
Mm,
Like, are you going to be incredibly vague like Hemingway and never talk about that the
mm,
sun also rises is actually about manhood?
mm,
Never talk about it, but it is.
mm,
Or are you going to be more direct like Toni Morrison, and by the end of the novel you're like, oh, this is about slavery? Like, but you don't know it the first, but you pick it up pretty quick, like, it
mm,
comes in. But that's just about, like, your style as an author and how
mm,
clear you make that.
sure.
So mother arrives to tell her dad wasn't dad. So what's the impact of that on Clarissa?
Uh, the one thing she's been holding firm in terms of who she
Yeah,
is her dear father, who she put on a pedestal,
yeah.
and now he isn't.
And now he isn't. And so this is the big explosion moment, right?
So yeah, it is. It's huge. And to begin with, the fact that her birth father is actually that she was conceived in Vanuatu. This is why the mothers felt she's just got to get
Yeah, I've got to go. I've got to tell
in.
you now. Yeah, you're in
Yeah,
Vanuatu. I've got to tell you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then, of course, the other people, key characters, are because his relatives are on the other island running a
Mm.
business.
Okay,
So there's still a connection
okay.
in Vanuatu, even though he's French. So they come to they cross paths. So to begin with, Clarissa's not even interested in who her birth father was.
Okay.
She's just so absolutely distraught and feels like that's the absolute worst thing that her mother could have possibly done to her.
Yeah. So there's a loss of identity here
Huge, yeah.
in what happens, and she's very distraught. And then we kind of have a break into two moment where she's got to repair the relationship with mom, and we've got this other family now,
Hmm.
which she's going to meet. What is the relationship with mom? What's the journey there?
Mum keeps hanging in.
Okay.
At first, Clarissa just doesn't want to engage with her. Her mother leaves,
Sure.
goes back, and there's a um, and then she talks with her older brother, who's in works at a university in Oxford, at
Yeah.
Oxford, uh, and she throws some stuff at him. First of all, she wants to know if he knew, who else knew this? Was she the
Yeah.
only one who didn't know it? But also, and so they've been quite close, but they've been living a long way apart for a long time. So that's, essentially they get on well, but they haven't been in regular contact.
Yeah.
And then in the part of talking about her father, her father who brought her up, who she idolized,
Hmm.
he got on better with the mother. He got on well with the father too, but he was closer to the mother.
Sure.
He reveals something that happened that shows her, and it's not a big deal, and it's not really his fault, but it tarnishes the pedestal father a little bit in her
Okay.
mind. So she's starting to realize things are not, she's certainly realizing things are not as they seem. So dad, and that kind of starts to open the door to her finding out about her birth father.
Okay. So
And
we
then
have this.
gradually, some things are happening in the Vanuatu context where she's learning everything is not as it seems, things are not black and white, da 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 da. And she's starting to apply a few things back to her mother, thinking about, gee, how hard it must have been for her mother after her father died, which she'd never really, it had all been about her. She'd been a 9-year-old and abandoned by her father who died, kind of thing, abandoned, inverted
Okay.
commas. Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay. So she starts to empathize with
Mm.
her mom
Slowly, slowly.
slowly, slowly.
Mm.
Where does all of this end with her
Uh,
mom? How does it end with her mom?
with a not buddy buddy, but an adult.
Yeah.
I sort of think there around that relationship. I think, have you ever done transactional analysis, the
Hmm.
TA thing?
Yep.
You know, so we're not leaving it. It doesn't end up in a really a mother child
Yeah.
situation. It becomes a adult to adult.
Yeah.
um, and her mother is totally accepting of her finding a birth father, doesn't challenge, just supports.
Okay.
And gradually, Clarissa comes to trust in her mother a bit, and does him and talks about her life and what she's doing, and is her mother's fully aware of her interaction with the new family and what's happening there. So
Gotcha.
they reach a this is good. This is touching on one of my key dilemmas, or has always been. They reach a satisfactory relationship where, in the future it could be fine. But it's not the main feature of the ending. So my key question from time to time working through it all has been, oh God, should this neatly be about broken relationship with mother, fixed relationship with mother, and that be the big journey? And I don't want that to be the strongest. It's the context, but it's not forefront, if that
Did you
makes
ever decide on genre? You and I have
sense.
talked a lot about
I
genre.
know, I know. I'm still between family saga and mystery, but it's not thriller, and it's not the sort of mystery that has dead bodies or crimes.
Yeah.
You know,
So this, for me, the more we talk about it, this is the
Mm,
first time we've really talked about the ending of your book.
it is.
The
Yeah.
more we talk about it, the more for me this feels like a family saga literary fiction,
Okay.
right?
Good.
Like
Okay.
this is a oh man, who wrote those big family sagas? Like the one Hawaii and all. It's like a Mitchner.
Mitchell.
Yeah. And so what's beautiful about those is there's not a single plot line,
Hmm.
but there is a single plot line.
Yeah.
So there's 20 strands,
Mm,
but when you look at them, they're actually just a rope. And
right.
that's what you're writing. You're writing a book that has, we've got Clarissa, we've got the child, we've got the new country, we've got her mother, we've got her new family. They feel like multiple plots, and you're right. All of them need to come to a conclusion.
I've always felt, almost from quite early on, that The thing that's the real continuity point is theme rather than plot.
Yeah, and that's a very lit fic, I would say. I mean, I don't have a master's in English or anything, but I would say that's a very literary fiction device that
Mm,
we're living in the theme of Clarissa's self-discovery.
sure.
This
Mm-hmm.
is and really this is about Clarissa healing. Clarissa's because the story you're telling me right now, well, actually let's put a pin in that. Um, and we'll come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about what happens with this new family. The brother, the dad gets a little, she becomes kind of realistic about her father.
Yeah.
And then she goes to meet the new family.
Yes, she's already interacted unknowingly with her birth father's sister. That's Marie in the market way
Okay.
in way back when with the mother,
Okay.
which was kind of the beginning of things unraveling.
Yeah.
So she and Marie gave her. She was after she and her mother had met Marie and there'd been that strained interaction where
Yeah.
mother was very uncomfortable. A little bit later in that same day, like within the next hour,
Yeah.
Larissa went off on her own, leaving her mother looking at fabrics, and went back to get another fruit juice from the fruit
Yeah.
juice store. And Marie, who was shopping for the family there, she came, they crossed paths again.
Okay.
And Marie gave her business card with her contact details because, just from the point of view, she's a very sociable creature.
Yep.
She'd love to look after her. And, sometime when you're over here again, give me a call. I'll come and get you, come and meet the family, introduce you to some French people,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
That's
But of
great.
course,
It gives Clarissa, it
they're
puts
away.
the
Yes.
it puts the onus of action on your protagonist,
And
which is
her
great.
mother does not know she has this
Yep.
information.
Yeah.
Mm.
So does she ever call?
Yes, that's a turning point in the story.
Okay. Um, what happens when she calls?
Um, when she calls,
Does she go to meet the family?
she gets a wonderful, well, warm, lovely to hear from you, da da da. And when she calls, it's because she's got the opportunity to go over there on a not a training, well, kind of a follow up to her initial training course from school.
Okay.
So she's ringing to say, I am coming over there. And I just thought I'd give you a ring. And she's hovering, waiting to see what the reaction is. So there, after she's had her one day, she's staying overnight. Marie picks her up, takes her up to the family. She's there for lunch. That's the
Okay.
beginning of an interaction with that family.
Gotcha.
Not with the birth father, because he's in France.
Okay. So she meets the family for lunch. What happens with that family?
There's some tiptoeing around each other because Clarissa knows from her mother
Yeah.
that who her birth father is. She does not know, though she's got this feeling from the first interaction where Marie was staring at them and then came over to meet them,
Okay.
recognizing the mother from years ago. She's got this feeling that she thinks, but she doesn't know and she can't ask her. So
Okay.
there's a whole lot of tiptoeing around each other going on, and it's all from Clarissa's point of view. So there's some sort of game playing there, but not a direct acknowledgement yet that
Gotcha.
there is a relationship,
Okay.
but enough to allow for an ongoing connection.
Okay. So hesitant but ongoing. Where does this relationship go after that?
Um, After that,
She ever
oh,
meet her father?
well, right at the end,
Okay. Why are you
which
holding that to the end?
because he's not there, he's in France.
Well, I mean, that's a
Um,
choice you've made. Why have you put him in
uh,
France?
and he's in the business with his sister and brother-in-law, right?
Yeah.
So he's an import-export thing. He does the importing into France, they export from Pacific. So They do meet, but it's almost part of the resolution.
Okay. How does meeting a stranger bring her resolution?
By then, he's not a stranger. They have had some interactions, Skype kind of things.
Okay,
So
so she
they
talks,
just
even though she doesn't meet him, she has interactions with him.
she does a little bit, yes. But
How does
then
she feel about those?
she's cautious and she doesn't throw herself into it. She's still toying with betraying her real father, her father who brought her up.
Hmm.
That's playing with her mind still, and especially to begin with. And then
Okay.
she gets past that a little bit and starts getting quite curious and caught up and finding out more about him. And Marie is desperately keen to bring them together to begin with.
Yeah.
And then something happens that flicks right back into the violence that Marie then becomes paralyzed about bringing them together.
What
And
happens?
out of that, Clarissa takes charge.
What happens?
She she forces the issue. She takes the choice. Marie, who loves to please everybody and hates conflict, is caught
Yeah.
in the middle. Has
Okay.
got quite close to Clarissa. They're both quite close to one another by then.
Yeah.
Clarissa discloses the abuse in the past to her in a
Okay.
trusting kind of thing, shares that information. And subsequently, her birth father, who's got some stuff in his past, um, triggers something with his sister where she goes, "Oh my God, I don't know if I should actually broker this whole connection." And she
Okay.
starts to pull back and not um, push it along. So she's
Gotcha.
got both of those parties sort of going, "What's happening here?" And
Okay.
she's gone to ground a wee bit and she's paralyzed. And Clarissa, this is my this is my big climax kind of resolution thing. Clarissa basically takes the choice off Marie,
Mm.
as to whether Marie will disclose some stuff to Clarissa or not. She removes it from her and says, "I what if I make the decision?"
Gotcha.
That's kind of, in a nutshell, the her kind of now becoming almost whole by being
Okay.
able to make such a major decision herself in a very thoughtful kind of a
Yeah.
manner, very adult.
And she decides to meet the father.
She decides to meet the father,
How does that go?
and then,
Because that's your big conclusion, right?
well, it's almost the conclusion there. And then she is going to spend. It's the end of the school year, and she's had her contract temporarily renewed for the next year. She's
Yeah.
going to he's coming to from France to Port Vila.
Hmm.
She is going across on the way home to New Zealand for the
Okay.
summer,
Yeah.
spend time with her mother.
Yeah.
She's spending time in Port Vila with the family en route. So she's meeting him then, and they're together for a few days before she goes to New Zealand
Okay. Do we get to see that meeting, or does it end before they meet
at the airport and
at the airport?
back at the house. But it's really not long at the moment, and I
Okay. It
don't.
doesn't, from what you're describing, the
Mm,
decision to meet is actually the
the
big part.
critical. Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Um,
I'm so glad you said
yeah,
that.
no, you're describing it beautifully. So let's talk about the two chords of your rope
Hmm.
that you have going so far. Because I think once we start looking at these two chords, I think the chord of the child and any other chord you've got going that you want to talk about,
Hmm.
you're going to find that it resolves itself clearly. Pacing in the book is going to be an interesting question.
Mm.
You're going to have to decide if it's okay that these things in a modern story, we like, because we think of stories in 90-minute movie segments,
Uh-huh.
we like everything to save the cat come to an end at one time.
Mm,
right? We like a tidal wave to build and crash. And then we're like,
mm,
yay, let's go home.
mm.
So it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm,
Your story, this is your story, it's your art, right? Carol, if you had, and like you and I have talked about this before, but you said earlier on in this call, if you had said earlier on this call, I'm looking to write a book that's going to launch a career, that's going to lead to 10 sequels, that's going to, you know, birth this thing that will sustain my income,
mm,
then I would tell you we need to pull these apart. Book one is mom, book two is dad, book three is child, right? Like, and I'd be
mm,
like, you got to keep them simple. But if that's not the art you want to make, if the art you want to make is this complex and beautifully woven robe, then you have a lot of freedom as to how you cascade these endings.
mhm,
Does that make sense? And you can kind of end them however you want, right? As long as you're keeping Clarissa's growth and evolution at the center of the theme, you
mm,
can cascade these things. Is it going to go, when you release it, is it going to go number one on the Amazon charts under mystery? No, no. Right? Like, it's not written to genre. It's not written to, like, I mean, yeah, hey,
mm.
anything's possible, but it would be define all of the, like, this is what we know about how things work on Amazon
Yes. Mm,
understandings. Is this the kind of book that, like, people read and love, and it sleeps for years, and then somebody grabs it and is like, I'm gonna make this into something? Yeah, this is that kind of book, right? Like, remember that Game of Thrones, which is this kind of book, right? Like, Game of the Fire and Ice saga by George R. R. Martin, Game of Thrones is this book. There are 100 threads in a rope. The rope from the beginning to end is winter is coming.
mm,
And there are 100 threads. And some of them end in book one, and some of them end in book two, and some of them don't start until book two, and they end in book three, right? Like, and he's always weaving the same rope. The world that these people live in is about to have a cataclysmic event that is
mm,
going to change everything, right? He's always reading the same rope, but their roles in it are constantly moving and spiraling. And he's got all of these plots that are weaving together to create this story. And so, because he didn't hold to, like, I got to write the 90-minute thing that I know genre readers are going to love and buy, because he gave himself the freedom, that book sat for a long time, right? Like, it wasn't like he wrote that book and then, yes, the next day it became a movie. It sat for years and years and years, with fantasy readers slowly picking it up and going like, oh man, this is something here, passing it around word of mouth, slowly growing until finally it became what we now think of as Game of Thrones, right? Like, that's the ideal case for this story, right? Like, so kind of putting those in perspective for you, like what you're writing, let's go back into, like, let's zoom back into what we're talking about so far. We've got happy childhood for Clarissa, right? Being kind of her starting point. And then everything is disrupted. And then she takes agency and is like, I'm going to create myself anew.
mm.
And this is really where your book starts, right? Like, this is all flashback. This is really where the book starts. I'm going to create
Excuse me,
myself anew. Oh, yeah.
excuse me, just a second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've got these chapters here that are like flashback. And then this is kind of your starting point. Clarissa's seeking a new country. And Clarissa's seeking a new life is really what I'd say.
Mm,
Immediately we get interruptions in loss of the idyllic new life, which breaks into these two
mm,
strands.
mhm,
In this strand, we're seeking it. Remember, this is the rope. Clarissa is seeking a new life.
mm,
This strand is about Clarissa learns to trust her mother, right? This strand is about Clarissa learns that she can handle her trauma,
Mm.
right? Then we've got this other strand up here with Clarissa meets child, and we have her meeting the child, and then child triggers past fears is another disruption moment. So you can see how you can see here that we've got the cascade you've got going in your plot is disruption, challenge, moment of hesitancy, growth, right?
Mm. Mm.
Disruption, challenge, moment of hesitancy, disruption, moment of hesitancy, growth, right? So you've got another disruption here. And I'm not
Mhm.
going to connect it to the larger piece yet because we'll have to decide, you'll have to decide where it connects. We've got another disruption. And then she runs to protect the child in a sacrificial way. And you said that this is bad.
Said it was
Talk
what?
bad, like this is a mistake.
Well, it is and it isn't. For
Okay,
her,
talk about that.
okay. So for her, it's the absolute best thing she could do is to almost where she hadn't been able to protect herself when she was vulnerable. She is
Mm,
now, here's this child who she is feeling this protection towards and emotional connection with. She is going to protect him no matter what. So it's entirely justifiable to her that she acts in that way. In doing so, she takes no, she does one thing that would have saved her, but it wasn't possible for it to do so because of some other things because the person wasn't there, basically.
yeah, yeah.
And so she goes and she acts in what she thinks she's doing the absolutely best thing without even thinking really about any ramifications in terms of where she is, cultural
Gotcha.
norms. She vaguely knows some of the stuff, but it doesn't even come into the picture because it's more important to protect this child.
Okay. What happens after she takes that action?
She is then suddenly, no, not suddenly, gradually becomes aware that she's being ignored. And in fact, she gets called by her own village, the people who are her hosts, who are the
Mm-hmm.
local community, to take part in a low level, because these things go from, you know, small infringements to major crimes, to a reconciliation process between two villages.
Okay.
And out of that, she actually thinks she's going to be sent home, she's going to be punished, and neither of those things happen. And she learns that they have a whole process around dealing with this, dealing with an infringement and making good and moving on and letting it go, which is
Uh,
huge for her in her own learning about life and about thinking about what her mother did.
okay. Um, okay. So I don't like that last phrase. So, she learns that forgiveness is, would you say
It's
like forgiveness is possible through process
sure.
or maybe through work and process? Okay. This is a beautiful plot line. This is gorgeous.
Mm.
Um, I would actually, so I would kind of line this plot line. If I were to put this plot line in your book, and I know that this is kind of a general spacing, but this is kind of how I would line these three resolutions up. Um, I would have the child plot wrap before as she's learning to empathize with her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Because you really do have a 1, 2, 3 stage of growth.
Mm.
So you're going to wrap this one first.
Okay.
You're going to wrap this one second, and then you're going to wrap this one third.
Uh-huh.
Because there you can see the growth arc in her of forgiveness is possible.
Mm.
I'm experiencing forgiveness. I'm now managing trauma.
Mm.
Right? Like those are 3 beautiful steps of growth. Is there another
Mm.
place in here? Is there another strand in here to this rope?
Not another strand, but
Okay.
there's more in the development of that top line.
Okay.
So,
Talk to me about that.
okay, so we've got the reconciliation process, which doesn't involve the child at all. It's all adult stuff.
Yeah.
She, and then, but it doesn't change the fact that this child is still potentially in danger.
Okay.
Um, and then he disappears.
Ah.
And she is, of course, that affects her hugely.
Okay. How does
She's
that
been
affect her?
told, she's basically told there is a process for dealing with these things.
Yeah.
You know, trust in it. She hasn't. It hasn't happened. That's why she took action in her mind, quite reasonably, but it was probably far too fast
Yeah.
anyway. She's learned about these nuances in terms of black and white, truth and lies.
Okay.
But then the child disappears, and she's very concerned, and she then um, she is then at the market with Serena, her best buddy, who's really major in the story, though we haven't really talked about her at all. And the story is the kids have said he
Mhm.
told us he was going to be in the movies,
Okay.
and they think he's gone to Hollywood. The kids think he's gone to Hollywood.
Okay.
What turns out to have happened is that the abductor, dubious relative, has taken him. He hears that there's a film crew making a film about the island, and he takes the child to be in the film because he thinks that the child will make some money and yeah,
Okay.
right. But none of this is known. It's just the
Yeah.
kids at school are saying he told us not to tell, but he said he's going to be in the movies, and they jump to the conclusion he's gone to Hollywood. They think he's flown overseas, but of course he hasn't at all. So she then meets. She and Serena are in the market, and they meet at a communal lunch table
Okay.
with 3 Australians who happen to be filmmakers on the island,
Okay.
and they say something which she thinks, um, hang on a minute, that sounds a bit like Tumo. And she describes him. He didn't have that name.
Yeah.
And she's sure that's him because of what's been said. So then she basically, then from that point on, she has put that in the hands of the authorities, and he has been found, and we don't learn how or when or anything.
Okay. But instead of rushing in to handle it herself, this time she uses tools.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that is resolved, and where that is resolved, I've got a little bit later in the process than you're putting there. But
I'm just laying it out.
no, I know you didn't know
Yeah.
that last development, but that's kind of like a last development in that strand. Um,
Yeah. I would actually put this as your 3.
okay,
So I would add this in, like I would let her start to trust her mother,
yep.
and then the child disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is so your ultimate is still the I know how to handle my own trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
would define this as like I know how to use I'm going to use the tools provided for me.
Mm.
Does that make sense? So it is kind of a like, I see that tools can bring trust is one.
Mm.
I come to forgiveness and trust. I am now going to use the tools in a mature way. I'm going to manage trauma
Then in the ultimate, yeah.
in the ultimate.
Mm.
That's how I would line up those. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that like end one, end two, end three, and four. Like these are all going to weave together. I would probably, let me show you what I did. I just wrote a book like this. Um, let me see if I can find it real quick. And I can show you how I tracked this. I had five, I had 7 themes going. Oh, so many themes. I had 7 chords to my weird my weird rope. Um, if I haven't, I may have run the spreadsheet when I finish the book. We'll see. Um, what I did, is what I did with you just now,
Mm-hmm.
which is I worked through my outline of everything, and then I said, okay, how do I line? Like, how do these scenes wrap? How do they like come together? Um, Sorry, I'm still looking for the sheet. Nope. Give me 1 second. I'll find it. There we go. Is that it? Maybe. It's loading. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So I had, let me share my screen again. No, that I have it up. I had all these chapters
Mm-hmm.
and I had multiple themes. I had a church theme. I had a band theme. I had a house theme. I had an aster thread. Like these are my ropes. If I were to lay out the ropes in my book, I had an
Mm-hmm.
aster rope. I had a Johnny rope. I had a Chrissy rope. I could tell you, just like you told me, here are the beats of each of those ropes.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what's going to happen with the church rope. Here's what's going to happen with the aster rope. Here's what's going to happen with the house rope.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I put them in a sheet in like the order that they were in, and then I color coded each rope.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way I spaced them out was like, I never want there to be more than one rope. Like, I never want one rope to dominate a part of the book until the ending, where I'm
Mm-hmm.
really. So, if you follow this, you can start to see the ropes wrap up,
Yeah.
right? We've got band, band, band. Band is going to wrap up right here. You see, it gets like a big climax. That's the climax of my band rope.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my Chrissy rope, right? Chrissy is here. Chrissy is here. There were a lot less scenes for this rope,
Mm-hmm.
so I had to space them out more in the book. You don't see her as often, right? But my Chrissy rope wraps here.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the house rope, which is one of the ones that wraps earliest. House, house. You can see you get it a lot up front, but then my house rope wraps right here,
Mm.
halfway through the book, and you don't ever see the house rope again.
Yeah.
So the way that I organized my like when do these scenes happen in my book is I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, at the beginning I want them all well spaced. I want to be introducing things. Some of the ropes don't actually show up until later. Like
Mm-hmm.
Johnny doesn't show up until chapter 15.
Mm-hmm.
Um there's a aster as a rope that doesn't show up until chapter 19, right? Like so I have a cascading of starting and then a cascading of closing
Mm-hmm.
until the last one is the last one left. This kind of like laying it out like this helped me figure out
Mm-hmm.
how I open them and how I close them,
Yep.
right? Again, this is just a tool, but you've
Mm-hmm.
got your cascades in here.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is like, how do you open them and how do you close them to give a satisfying emotional journey? And what I did was I labeled them out for my character's growth because my rope is about the growth of this couple.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the maturity of this couple. They're moving from wide-eyed and naive to scarred but hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like learning what it means to like be wounded and then come through those wounds.
Yep.
And so like what I did was I was like, okay, I know how these close. I do want a big conclusion. So you can see at the end, I took my most important
Mm,
thread and I
mm,
just pounded it at the end,
mm,
right? Like just to get out the like, okay, this is
mm,
the last thread left for us to learn from. So anyway, that and something I did that you might want to consider that happens a lot in these kinds of books
mm,
is a repeated scene
mm,
where your protagonist has moments of reflection.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I do that. I do, you'll see in these dark blue lines, that's what that is. Those
Okay.
dark blue lines are a repeated scene where my protagonist is having a moment of reflection.
Mm,
I'm not introducing new information.
mm,
I'm not talking about, there's not like some big plot line happening. My protagonist is literally sitting with another
mm,
character talking about what's happened so far and how they've changed, right? We're having a pause and a moment. These happen. I used Game of Thrones earlier as an example. These happen all the time in Game of Thrones. He takes a break for a minute and he's like, let's let these two characters talk and reflect on what's happening. Now, he has, oh man, 5 vehicle characters, 7 vehicle characters by the end. Like he has so many vehicles, but each vehicle has these moments where they're just like going to stop and be like, okay, I need to just think and talk with somebody about
mm.
how I've come or where I've come. Those moments usually come right after these red ones because
Uh,
these are your dark night of the souls, right?
uh-huh.
When a red thing happens, Clarissa's thrown into this like, that's a moment where you need to have her have a conversation with somebody about like what
Mm,
just happened, because we need to feel the pain of that. And then you also want them to happen after these green ones,
mm,
where she has a debrief of like, okay, here's how I've changed, right? Like they don't need to be big scenes. They do need
mm.
to be doing something
Yes.
while they
Yeah.
do this. They can't just sit in a room and talk.
Mm,
They need to be doing something. A
mm,
lot of times, what I would do is I would have a moment of like, if I've wrapped mom and I have acceptance with mom, but I want to like live in this like uncovers the possible relationship with the child. I'd have her like meeting her mother for lunch, and then all of a sudden she discovers something about the child, right?
mm,
Like you have your scenes already written, so you can kind of see like, oh, in this scene, I can
mm,
give Clarissa just a segment, like 10 exchanges where she takes a moment to reflect on what's going on.
mm,
Right.
mm.
You don't need to write all new scenes. Just
No.
plug it into what you have. Right.
Yeah.
Like, but do make sure you give her those moments because those
Mm,
we never, this is a high, like when you start to twist and turn plots like this, you're talking about a high concept book, right?
mm,
Like, so you don't want to hand it to the reader because the readers coming to this book are coming for the highbrow journey, right?
mm,
We don't we don't watch Downton Abbey because we're hoping Magnum PI will fly in on a helicopter,
mm,
right? We watch Downton Abbey to get the deep social engagement between the characters. And so if there's a character running around being like, I don't like the rich people upstairs, they oppress us, then people are like, wait, this is too on the nose.
mm, mm,
Right. So you can't have Clarissa being like, I feel like it this way that I grew.
mm,
But you do need her having a moment in which she's like, hey,
mm,
mom, I'm really glad that we have this relationship now.
mm.
And her mother can be like, are we going to go get, beers together every Friday night? And she's going to be like, no, that's not where we are. But I feel like I can talk to you. And that's all you need. Those like 4 exchanges are all you need to show that like character growth
Yeah.
and to make the reader go like, oh yeah, this is what I was hoping her relationship with her mother would go to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. You
Mhm.
could even do something, it strikes me with the father.
Mm.
I don't know. This might feel unfulfilling, but you could even do something where you never actually show him.
Well, it's almost that,
Yeah.
and I feel okay about that, but I've got to test it out and see.
Yeah, I would might write it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has this been helpful tonight?
No, yeah, really good. I'm sorry it's not quite what you thought we were
No,
doing.
I just came to help you. I was gonna do whatever you wanted to do
It's
tonight.
really
I hope I
helpful.
didn't run with something that you didn't need.
It's really helpful. No,
Okay,
it's good.
good.
Thank
That's
you. And you've
that's
gone on
always
a
my
bit of
goal.
a which I really appreciate.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's I'm gonna hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
Mm,
Uh
okay.